And of course, when a person is not able to do this, well, then she shouldn't. And obviously, too, our asceticism will consist in discovering to what extent each one of us can simply remain quiet and listening, and to what extent we do need some activity, some work that does not completely interfere with this, but which relaxes us and takes us away from mere concentration and enables us to participate healthily in the life of our community and so forth. And in other words, keeps us in tune physically and psychologically so that we are able to listen fruitfully without just going stale and going dead. I mean, there is such a thing as overdoing interior prayer and overdoing concentration and overdoing recollection, which is harmful and deadens our capacity to listen and to attend to God. This we all know, and I don't want to talk about that here. But let us emphasize the fact that our attention to Jesus alone, our listening to His Word, our attitude of interior conviction and awareness that this is the highest value in our life, this is in itself a most effective discipline and a most purifying form of ascetic training and formation. And a person receives quietly, hiddenly, and secretly from God a great deal of benefit simply by this listening and this quiet attention to God. In this connection, let me just simply read to you one or two passages of St. John of the Cross, which will come in very handy here, I think. Speaking of solitude and the benefits of solitude on the soul and a tranquil listening to God, paying attention to Him and so forth, what he calls the habit of tranquility of solitude, in which the soul is moved and guided to divine things by the Spirit of God. In which, in this solitude, in this listening, in this tranquil attention to God, God acts directly upon the one who prays, doing it by Himself, communicating Himself to the soul without other means, without passing through angels, men, or images or forms, he says. And that in this solitude, God and the beloved are together in great intimacy. Now let me read what he says here. The solitude wherein the soul lived before time was its desire to be without all the blessings of the world for the sake of its spouse. Now that is a good definition, or a good indication of something, of that choice that I was speaking of before, a desire, an active desire to forego benefits, privileges, blessings, advantages, which are characteristic of a worldly life or characteristic of an active life, characteristic, incidentally, of a good worldly life, you see. We do not deny the goodness of all these things, but we renounce their goodness for something else, which we see to be better for us, and yet which does not appear evident at all to anybody else as better. This is an important point. The soul strove to become perfect and to acquire perfect solitude, wherein the soul attains to union with the Word, and consequently to all refreshment and rest. It is this that is signified by the nest which is here spoken of, namely rest and repose. And it is thus as though he were to say, in this solitude wherein aforetime she lived, working therein with labor and anguish because she was not perfect, she has now set her rest and refreshment, since she has now acquired the solitude perfectly in God. In that solitude which the soul has with respect to all things, and wherein she is alone with God, He guides and moves her and raises her to divine things. That is to say, He raises her understanding to divine intelligence, since it is now alone and detached from all other strange and contradictory intelligence. And he moves her will freely to the love of God, for it is now alone and free from other affections. And he fills her memory with divine knowledge, since it too is now alone and emptied of other imaginings and fancies. For as soon as the soul disencumbers these faculties and voids them of all lower things and of all attachment to higher things, leaving them in solitude with naught else, God at once uses them for the invisible and divine, and it is God who guides the soul in this solitude. Even as St. Paul says concerning the perfect, they are moved by the Spirit of God, and so forth. Not only does he guide her in her solitude, but it is he himself alone who works in her, using no other intermediary. He finds her alone, as has been said, and thus he will give her no other company, nor will he have her profit by any other or trust any other save himself only. And it is also fitting that, since the soul has now left all things and passed through all intermediaries, soaring above them all to God, God himself should be her guide and the intermediary to himself. The difficulty about a passage like that is that he is talking about those who are very far advanced in the spiritual life, for this to be perfectly full and fruitful in them. And we must remember that one must pass through other ways in order to get this, and that one must pass through a stage in which, as he intimated there, solitude is not restful and tranquil, but painful, a painful and purifying emptiness. I do not want to go into all that here, that is another question too, but what I want to say is that even at the very beginning of the contemplative life, right from the start, when a person has received this call from God, he or she does realize obscurely already at the beginning that for him or for her, the great supreme value of life is going to consist in a surrender directly to God, in the hope and confidence and belief that God will act directly upon him or her without the intermediary of an ordinary active human existence. And that whereas it may be normal and may be fruitful and so forth for most people to reach God through the medium of a married love and a bringing up children and an active life or an active apostolic life, fully mixed up with the things of time and of the world, and that though this may be a perfectly normal and perhaps in some respects a better way, certainly a way that the rest of the human race appreciates more, still that there is for us this mysterious call to a life of direct communion with and dependence upon and guidance by and formation by and purification by God, in silence, in prayer, in solitude, in detachment, in freedom. It is here that we have to seek the real meaning of freedom in the contemplative life. And other forms of freedom have to be abandoned in order to have this kind of freedom. And therefore it becomes necessary to accept restrictions and restraints and self-denial and sacrifice and so forth, as we have always heard and always know. But I mean, it's much deeper than what we've always heard. Restriction and sacrifice have to be accepted in order that this inner freedom may grow. Therefore, in the contemplative life, in the monastic life, there is necessarily an element of renouncing advantages, renouncing good things which are help other people to expand and develop, in order to find our expansion and development and rest and peace in a totally different dimension, which for a great deal of the time is painful and difficult and full of hardship and very demanding, especially demanding because it is something where we are alone and unable to explain ourselves to other people. And of course this is very hazardous because so many people are not able to handle this, as we know from experience. Perhaps we can say that in our life there are many people who do have an authentic appreciation of what this might be for them, and yet they are not able to do it. Not only that, we must not blame them, we must not say that it's their fault. We must not say that they have not been generous enough. We don't know. It is just a fact that few people are able to live with this kind of thing for a lifetime. Those of us who recognize ourselves really called to this should be very happy that we are, much more happy than we usually are about it. We should be very grateful to God indeed that He's called us to this life, and that He has called us to this particular kind of peace and this particular kind of fulfillment, which in so many respects is an unfulfillment, and which is almost scandalous to people of our time who are so intent upon human fulfillment. And yet even they recognize, when they come in contact with people who have lived in a solitary or cloistered life, they recognize that there is a special kind of happiness in this life.